sovereignty. And I'll also, of course, tell some stories about seeds, which is something that I love to do and find very important. So getting started here, this first page that you see, this screen, is just a screenshot from our website. And as you can see, it talks a little bit about what we do. It's a seed company that offers rare, open pollinated, and culturally important vegetable, herb, and flower seeds grown by urban and rural farmers committed to food sovereignty and sustainable agriculture. You can also see here that 50% of every seed packet sale goes back to the farmer that grew it. And so a big part of the work that I'm doing is actually working with the farmers and supporting the farmers that grow for the catalog. Gotta figure out how to move to the next screen. Oh, there we go. So this screen here shows all the farmers that I'm working with this year, or last year, the people who grew the seeds for the catalog. You can move if you're on the screen, you can move the video portion so you can see all the growers there. Last year, 21 growers grew seeds for the catalog. And you can get a sense from looking here that people are from all over the country, from all different backgrounds. And this growers network really came together organically from both my personal community of friends and a community of food justice activists and organizers and organizations from around the country that I've been working with for the past 15 years. And so it's really amazing to be able to collaborate with all these growers, and really only 2 or 3 of them have had experience growing seeds for other catalogs before working with me. My intention was not to curate a catalog of particular types of seeds, but instead to find farmers whose work I really admire in their communities to invest in as seed producers, and to do mentorship and training with them around producing seeds. And the reason I wanted to do this was I've been doing food justice work, as you'll see, for many years, and I was noticing that very few of the farms and farmers that I worked with were actually saving, let alone producing their own seeds, despite our emphasis on food justice and food sovereignty and self-sufficiency. And so I wanted to bring my knowledge of working with seeds to the people that I've been working with for so long around food justice. So now going back in time, I wanted to show you a little bit of what I've done before that influenced my work with Truelove Seeds. These 2 pictures really represent kind of the work I've done to support community-based solutions to the inadequacies and inequities of the food system and injustices. And so, my previous work with Just Food in New York City, one thing that I did was build chicken coops with communities all around the country, all around the city, all 5 boroughs. And so, on the surface, a lot of people were like, oh, isn't that cute, chickens in the city? And that's a lot of the attention we would get, is the novelty factor. But for the people who were keeping the chickens, this was a really important next step in their food justice work in their communities. This was a way to bring, to grow more protein in the form of eggs, bring more education, and so on. And so I won't go too into depth with the chicken project, but I wanted to lift it up because it really was, building these coops was really like a barn raising. As you can see in this picture, lots of people came together to create these coops. We shared carpentry skills, and part of this was teaching people how to raise chickens, and finding people with throughout the city who had that expertise to share. In the beginning, I was hired by Just Food, went through their training of trainers program to teach how to raise chickens. But by the end of my time there, I had trained and worked with so many people and built up such a big network that I never had taught those classes anymore. And instead they were taught by people from around New York City with sometimes decades of experience keeping chickens there. with the training of trainers on the right, this is a photo of when Karen Washington and I led a training for Urban Tree Connection here in Philadelphia. But this is a course that I've been leading since 2007 in New York City, identifying who are the community leaders around New York City at that point, who can be leading workshops for their communities and beyond, kind of challenging the dynamic that it's always some staff member of a nonprofit or an extension service who is the expert coming from outside the community and teaching classes on food and farming and health. You know, it's kind of a problematic model that we see a lot. And so this was an effort to turn that on its head and recognize the leaders within the communities who had that experience and had that knowledge and invest in their workshop facilitation skills. And so both of these models kind of worked with identifying who are the people doing the work on the ground and how can we invest in them as leaders and put our resources through our organizations into those communities and into those leaders versus kind of helicoptering into communities and acting like people don't actually know how to care for themselves. And so these are kind of the foundations of where I come from in this work. And when I started thinking about running a seed company, really my first thought was, before even thinking of doing a seed company, was how do I bring what I've learned in producing seeds and share that with communities that are doing the important work of feeding themselves, of building self-sufficiency, and how can this knowledge that I have kind of support what they're doing in a deeper way. So I wanted to move to this kind of wordy slide here. There's not going to be a lot of words on these slides, but this one I felt was important, and this is where I want to set us up for a quick dialogue in small groups. You can see there's two definitions here. One is about food justice, one is about food sovereignty. There's a lot of definitions out there. I chose these two. So, one is saying food justice is communities exercising their right to grow, sell, and eat healthy, food. Healthy food is fresh, nutritious, affordable, culturally appropriate, and grown locally with care for the well-being of the land, workers, and animals. And you'll see in the next definition, it's very similar, and they both mention culturally appropriate food. You'll notice if you peruse our website, and as I talk through this presentation, that focusing on our ancestral foods is central to what we do with Truelove Seeds. I even named Truelove Seeds after my maternal great-great-grandmother, my mother's 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 mother, Letitia Truelove, to kind of get at that essence of ancestry and honoring the people that came before us. When I talk to the farmers that I work with, and you saw the 21 of them from last year on that previous slide, my first question is not, will you grow this seed for my catalog, but what seed tells your story? What is the seed that really embodies either the community that you're a part of, the work you do in the community, the land that you live on, in some way tells your story? And so before I talk too much about why I do that, I kind of wanted to pose it to the group. When I was asked to do this presentation, it was really framed as a dialogue. And so I want to have people be able to talk to each other about this question that I'm going to ask now, which is, how might growing culturally appropriate foods and saving their seeds deepen food justice work, or deepen your food justice work? So again, how might growing culturally appropriate foods and saving their seeds deepen food justice work? So I kind of want to dig into this concept because I've been seeing these types of definitions for, again, like almost 15 years. And, culturally appropriate is often in these concepts of food justice, but it's not often what we focus on, for good reason. There's so many other important concepts in here. But because it's such a big focus of my work with seeds, I wanted to pose that to you. So culturally appropriate foods. Well, first of all, for me, this was a no-brainer because I'm working with seeds, and And as you'll see it in the next slide, to me, seed keeping is all about the story and all about the tradition. I mean, these seeds are, when you receive seeds, they're not like receiving inanimate objects. They're alive, and not only are they alive, they're connected to 10,000 years of human history. Humans are agricultural. We've been saving seeds since long before our memory. And so when you save a seed, you're really selecting, you're making a choice, right? You're selecting from your favorite plant, the healthiest plant, the most beautiful plant, the plant that tastes like you want it to taste. And so we're shaping these seeds, and we've been doing it for generations. And so the act of saving seeds is already so tied up with culture, just by the choices that we make and the seeds that we decide to save. And so, in my work with communities around food justice, it was always very inspiring to see groups that made that choice to grow their cultural crops so central to their work. And it was clear the joy that it would bring people and the meaning that it would bring people. You can see in these pictures, if you're on the computer, at the bottom of the screen, on the bottom left is my partner, Chris Bolden Newsome, and his father, Rufus Newsome, in his African diasporic garden at Sankofa Community Farm at Bartram's Garden. And here he's putting some sesame seeds pulled from a pod into his father's hands. And he's being surrounded by this sorghum, sorghum being an African species, and sesame as well, though much of the sesame we eat comes from India. It's a very important crop in Africa. And so in this garden, he focuses particularly on West African crops, and crops that have become important to Africans in the diaspora, as well as a way to work with his youth and his elders and his co-workers around reclaiming that history. And so, that brings this depth of meaning to the work, and also this sense of history, this sense of joy, survival, struggle. It kind of brings all the themes of both justice and just knowing who you are as a person to the work. The middle picture is Chef Osama, holding tight to this malachia, also known as Egyptian spinach or jute, and he's a refugee from Syria who cooks with malachia all the time, but hasn't seen a fresh plant in 10 years since he had to leave Syria. And so the ability to be reconnected with this food is really deep and powerful. Part of the loss that comes with becoming quote unquote American is the loss of the connection to where we came from a lot of times. I mean, obviously some people hold on to that tighter than others, but it becomes very difficult for many people. And on the right is, some gardeners from South Philly who are from Myanmar, holding on to some of the turmeric leaves that they use to cook fish, and again, hadn't seen fresh ones since having to leave Myanmar. And so you can see that the power of growing culturally appropriate food is more than just the ability to feed yourself, but to be able to choose to eat, to eat like you did at home or like your ancestors did. And that builds a really strong connection to the foods that you're eating and foods that you're growing and the seeds that you're saving. It's developing this very intimate connection to our food. And that's a very important thing, as we've all experienced, or most of us have experienced this separation from the land and separation from the food that's nourished our people for so long. So this becomes a reconnection or a rematriation, as Rowan White, Mohawk seed keeper, talks about. Rematriation is a concept that's very important to my work as well. My work before this, I'm going to move to the next slide. My work before this was with my mentor here, Dr. William Moyes Weaver, who found his grandfather's seed collection in his deep freezer after he died in the 70s. It had 4,000, well, at this point it has 4,000 plus varieties of heirloom seeds in it. But at that point, it was all these little baby jars with baby food jars with labels on them. And he decided to take upon himself, 40 plus years ago, to continue that legacy and continue that seed collection that had been started in 1932. So I was able to work with him for 4 years and really learn the art of seed keeping from him, seed saving, and storytelling. And that said, it was a private seed collection, and the seeds in this collection were living in jars in his house, and we would grow them every so many years before they would die in the jars. And they were from people all around the world, many native people, many people from different corners of the globe. And constantly while I was working there, I was like, these seeds need their people. And so Rowan White kind of introducing this concept of rematriation, of finding those seeds that are sitting in these seed banks and seed collections and making sure they get back to their original caretakers is a really important concept to me. I've been able to do that with many varieties from the Roughwood seed collection, many Lenni Lenape varieties, sending back to Lenni Lenape people. But really, finding the original caretakers for all of these seeds and reconnecting has been very important. Also in this picture is Debbie, whose land I use and whose house I'm in right now, and a friend Drew. On the right is the Seed Keepers Collective. This, I was introduced to Will Weaver and Seed Keepers Collective at about the same time. And Blaine Snipstall from Black Dirt Farm Collective on the left here in the red shirt, he had been to the Indigenous Farming Conference in Minnesota at White Earth Land Recovery Project, and kind of got inspired by conversations there with Indigenous elders and Indigenous communities who talked about this notion of seed keeping as something more in depth than seed saving. This idea that, like I said earlier, seeds embody the stories and traditions that came with them. And so he kind of heard this call to go back to people, to go back to their communities and start networks of seed keepers, and decided to pull a bunch of people together. And he invited me and my partner, Chris, to be part of that, those conversations. And so we gathered in farms like this one, to sit around and talk about, what does it mean to hold our ancestral seeds and to tell those stories? What does it mean to develop networks of people who are caring for seeds and supporting each other and developing their practice as seed keepers? So that was a very important moment for me in the development as a seed keeper. Okay, I'm gonna move to the next one. So here's the manifestation of that in the Philly area. Seed Keepers Collective went from Georgia to New York. And here in Philly, a couple years ago, this group got together in my hoop house here and in other spaces to do the same kind of work. How do we support each other in working with our communities to find those stories of the seeds, to find those traditions of the seeds, to learn from our elders, how do you plant this? What are some practices that have been passed down around these foods and these seeds? And each of these groups here are people represent groups that grow seeds for the catalog as well, the Truelove Seeds catalog. But beyond that, we're supportive of each other as growers in the Philly area. So this is a picture of my apprentices last year. 3 of them are staying on this year, and we have some more coming on. And so the work for me here at this farm is to not just work with growers all around the region and the country, but also invest in future seed keepers here at Truelove Seeds. And so, part of that work is also each of us choosing to work with our ancestral seeds and figure out what that means to us, and getting to know those seeds and food plants through their work here at Mill Hollow Farm, which is our home base. So it looks a lot like the technical aspect of how to grow and save and clean seeds. Here we're winnowing in a more traditional way with throwing baskets of chaff and seed in the air and letting the wind kind of take away the chaff. You can see one of the apprentices taking a nap. This is Farm School New York City coming down to take a tour in an intensive seed keeping class here at the farm. So education is a huge, huge piece of this for Truelove Seeds. So here's a transitional picture. This is Farm School New York City kind of cleaning some seeds, and they happen to be one of my ancestral seeds, or one that I've chosen to connect with as an ancestral seed. This is a Fagiolina del Trasimeno. Trasimeno is a lake in Umbria, which is a little further north than my southern Italian ancestors came from, but it's basically a black-eyed pea, which gets to the history of food. And long before the beans we think of today, like the kidney bean, the navy bean, the soup beans, and so on, those are American species. And so in Italy, it makes sense that an important legume would be the West African black-eyed pea, long before there was trade between the Americas and Africa and Europe. So I wanted to talk a little bit about about where my particular focus on ancestral seeds came from, because I think it's valuable to the food justice discussion. Well, this is kind of random that it's here, but here's me amongst a whole bunch of lettuce. You don't often see lettuce looking like this unless we've ignored it or we are seed producers. But I'm going to move to this slide here. It's interesting when we're talking about ancestral seeds, it's impossible not to talk about race. And these photos here are pictures of an uprooting racism training at Soulfire Farm a few years ago. And, there was a lot of really important conversation and work happening here. One theme that came up, really not the central theme, but one thing that kind of piqued my interest was this talk of like, what do white people bring to the table? What is our culture? And how does this myth of whiteness kind of feed into white supremacy? And so what's the history of race in this country? And you'll see on the right, Leah Penniman from Soulfire Farm took an excerpt from an interview that I did on Table Underground, kind of about this concept of whiteness and this idea of not having a culture, and how that feeds into the ability to steal other people's cultures and feeds into this to white supremacy. And so these ideas bubbling up at that training that we were leading was really around, okay, what do you bring to the table? What is your culture? If we're going to deconstruct white supremacy and deconstruct this concept of whiteness, who were you before? And so for me, a really important piece of focusing on ancestral seeds, looking at my Southern Italian seeds, looking at my Irish seeds, looking at my, down the line, my Jewish, Eastern European Jewish seeds, and even my British seeds, how does that help to deconstruct whiteness? And how can we talk about ancestral seeds in a way that's linked into systemic change and food justice and racial justice? I've talked at many conferences about my focus on ancestral seeds, and I've noticed that particularly white people get very excited about focusing on that, but often it's not linked to other efforts towards social change, food justice, etc., which is fine, but I like to make sure that we keep the justice element central. And so when I started looking into that, I heard from my partner who's Black and from Leah and from other people, like, why don't white people actually bring something of their own to the table rather than this impulse to appropriate other people's cultures? And so this is, besides my obsession with kind of family trees anyway, this has been an effort to do that as well. And it's been really interesting. And, I work with lots of types of farmers. 7 of the 21 growers for Truelove Seeds are African-American. working with various folks from Asian and Latin American diasporas, it's been particularly challenging for some of the white farmers that I'm working with to identify what are the seeds that tell your story. And it's not only white people either, it's anyone who feels disconnected from their story, whether that was, their ancestors choosing to assimilate, or the forced relocation to this continent, or genocide that has separated people from their ancestral stories. And so it's a challenging question for a lot of people. Obviously, recent immigrants and refugees have an easier time answering the question about what seeds taste like home. So this has been a powerful and sometimes very challenging exercise for people. That said, I'm going to tell you some of my seed stories here. Okay, it's 9:45. So on the lower left-hand side is a potato. It's called the lumper potato. It's the potato that was grown in Ireland in the mid-1800s. It was pretty much the only variety, and other varieties were closely related to it. A lot of times people tell the story of the Great Famine, blaming many people, many concepts like monoculture. Like they say, oh, if you monoculture, you're going to end up with the Great Famine. Or they'll blame the Irish people. But, it's really a story of colonialism. At that time, Irish farmers were growing plenty of good food, and it was being shipped to England and shipped outside of Ireland. Potatoes were considered a food fit for livestock. It wasn't something that the British were really eating much of. For Ireland, it was an amazing crop. It had recently arrived from the Andes. Potatoes were developed in Bolivia, Peru, Chile. If you've been eating parsnips and carrots and, grains and dairy, and suddenly you get this really amazing tuber that produces so much food and can feed a family, it's very exciting. But it also was all many people were left with to eat. And so people talk about the Great Famine as a natural disaster or something like that, but it was really a man-made disaster. And I like to tell this story for a couple of reasons. One is that my great-grandmother, Mary Lenehan, was raised on a potato farm in Western Ireland. So I think of her when I grow this potato. But I also tell it because it's a story that's still happening today. We're still eating food from poorer countries. And a lot of times we hear stories of like, oh, the people who are growing our quinoa can't actually even eat their traditional food anymore of quinoa because they're exporting it to us. So when we're getting really amazing food from poorer countries, what does that look like for the farmers in those areas, in their ability to feed themselves? So that's one seed story. In the upper right is what's called a Bravado bean. It's a bean that I learned about. I make a calendar every year, a seed keeping calendar, to tell seed stories like these. And I gave one to a Mohegan friend, and I'm from northeastern Connecticut, which is originally Mohegan land. So I gave it to my friend Rachel, and she told me when she looked at a succotash, a lima bean, and I was talking about how it's used by the Wampanoag people to make, and continues to be used to make succotash. And she said, hey, we make that too. Please include Mohegans in that story. Here's my great uncle's recipe. And I looked at the recipe, and it talked about this particular bean. And so I looked it up, and I realized it was a Southern Italian bean in this Mohegan recipe. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna grow this bean both for my Southern Italian heritage and to kind of connect me to this Mohegan story. And I was there at the Mohegan Reservation leading a workshop last year, and this picture was on the screen, and everyone said, that's our bean. And I learned later from Rachel's mother, Melissa Tantaquidgeon, who's the medicine woman for the tribe, that they would get this bean from their Southern Italian neighbors. And so they that kind of explained that connection. I mean, my Southern Italian ancestors moved to Southern Connecticut as well. So, growing this bean is a way for me to tell both stories. I think I'll move on. I'll mention that the picture of me with the giant squash is called Lunga di Napoli. It's means long squash of Naples. It's really fun to grow, but there's not much story to tell there besides that I just like to stay connected to my Neapolitan ancestry there. And then again, here's the Fagiolina del Trasimeno, the black-eyed pea we saw in the previous slide, that's endangered now because of the move towards mechanization, and it's not easily harvested by machines. And so there's a big effort to preserve it in that region. And I'm trying to help as well. Here is, trying to get to the next slide. Oh, there we go. So here, here's just a few examples of some of the groups that we work with and their seeds. I won't go into depth, really, they're their stories to tell. But here is Ko Fung with her bitter melon at Viet Lead's Resilient Roots Farm in Camden, New Jersey. It's Vietnamese refugees and their families growing their traditional crops and also doing lots of political education and community organizing around environmental justice issues. So they really pair the farming work with really amazing social justice work. And it's been awesome to collaborate with them. Here's a picture of a young man from Soulfire Farm holding their calendula. And Soulfire, their first crop they chose 2 years ago was Racina calendula, really to embody their healing work that they do. Last year they added many crops, seed crops of the African and Latin American diasporas as well. The farm in New Jersey, again, someone asked, is called Resilient Roots Community Farm. It's part of Viet Lead's work. Viet Lead, they're an amazing farm and collaborator. Down here in the lower left is the Island Red Pea, which a friend gave to me and my partner, having visited Matthew Rayford and Jovan Sage down in Georgia and Gullah Geechee land, land that's been in Matthew's family since emancipation, black land. And this is a traditional Gullah Geechee variety called, Sea Island Red Pea. So it's a black-eyed pea that's very small and very delicious. And we were able to grow it in our children's garden in West Philly with one of our elders who is Gullah Geechee, and that's her hands there. And she was and continues to be very excited to be reconnected with this particular seed. And then finally in the bottom right is my partner Chris's hands. It's actually the image that is our logo, and that's his butterbean, his speckled brown butterbean from the Mississippi Delta, where he would shell these with his grandmother on her porch every year, and has just recently reconnected with them as his particular focus for the Truelove Seeds catalog, and they are absolutely delicious and beautiful. I wanted to kind of end my talky part before I open it up for questions by just putting this slide up. I made this slide a year ago, but it stands true. I made it actually when I went to speak at the Indigenous Farming Conference at White Earth. And it was just an attempt to try to pull out some of the values that led to the creation of this project. So it's kind of like an in conclusion slide. The first one is obvious. The whole theme of this discussion series is food justice. And so really that's the theme of my work as well, supporting justice through the seed production and mentorship. And also through financial support. I wanted this project to be something that was valuable in terms of bringing in income. And it's not making any of the growers wealthy, but it's nice to be able to send checks 4 times a year based on the sales of the seeds. And some of the farmers are really happily surprised with what a little jar of seeds can yield, especially seeds that other people around the country and around the world have been really looking for, like callaloo, a very important African and Caribbean amaranth. Often it's other types of greens as well, but in this case, amaranth It's been very popular because people have been, it's central to people's foodways. And so those seed sales from literally a pint jar have been really significant to East New York Farms that works with the Caribbean community in their neighborhood. Okay, moving from the seed bank model to rematriation, again, looking to find the seeds that are very meaningful to people that are living in these collections that can then be shared back and taken back into stewardship if they haven't been already. That's really important to me. And, we grow lots of things here on the farm from my background, from my apprentice's background. And there's some that are not from any of our backgrounds that we're looking to build relationships with certain farmers as growers for those. And that's the end goal for me, is people caring for their ancestral seeds. Move from a nonprofit model to profit sharing. This was my attempt to get out of the nonprofit industrial complex. I was really excited to create a different model, try out a different model. There may be a time when I decide that it's too difficult to rely on sales to support this work. But that was my hope, is that instead of orienting towards foundations and wealthy people, I could orient myself to customers and communities that I want to, that I'd like to create a product in collaboration with all of these growers that people are excited about supporting, and an idea that people are excited about supporting, rather than kind of chasing grants and chasing foundations. People are experts in their own experience. This is why this is related to rematriation idea. Really looking to people to grow their foods and tell their own story. I try to tell my story, and I try to rely on other people to tell their stories. You see a lot in food justice work, people telling other people's stories. And I think it's so much more powerful and empowering when people are kind of experts in their own experience and recognized for that. Everyone has a culture and ancestral seeds. I think we talked about that a lot, or I did. Land is alive. I didn't talk about this at all, but here at our farm, we use natural farming principles. We don't till the soil. We add lots of compost. We do a lot with supporting pollinators. We do all that we can to respect and support the life that is in the soil and that is above the soil through natural farming. And finally, growth, transformation, and relationships take time. Some of the groups that I am working with, I've known for over a decade, sometimes almost 20 years. And that's kind of similar to what it means to care for seeds, right? Like a lot of times we'll sow seeds and we won't see the fruits of that labor literally for years in some cases. And so for me, I'm trying to grow slowly. I'm trying to grow relationships organically and in ways that are solid and built around trust. And so I'm recognizing that takes quite a long time. I think I will stop it there. Because I've been talking, I haven't been able to read what people have been writing, but I would love to hear from people, like any reflections or questions.
I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the process to be able to sell seeds to you, to Truelove. I was thinking about our Groundswell incubator farm and the folks there who are refugees, Karen refugees from Burma, and many of them save so much seed, and the bitter gourd reminded me of that. So just curious more about, how one goes about being able to sell to you, and what does a place expect to get as far as money for selling seeds to the company?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is just having initial conversation, hearing more about the project, hearing who the leaders of the project are and who's involved and what you're already up to. Like I said earlier, I always ask first the question, what is the seeds that kind of tell your story or that are connected to your story? And also what do you already grow really well? So that would be the first step. In terms of the financial relationship, basically, when I was at Roughwood Seed Collection, my mentor had a very close relationship with Baker Creek. heirloom seeds, and they were giving him the 50% of the actual sales. And so I decided that that felt really good as a grower. It felt respectful compared to other rates that we were getting. And so I thought I should at least try to do that. And so it really varies depending on, you know, how popular the seed is, what you might get back. And so it's kind of a shared risk, which also felt doable for me starting a new business with at that point, no capital, no savings. It made sense to try to share the risk with the grower. If the growers were up for that, then we would work together. And it's actually worked out very well especially for people growing crops that are hard to find on this continent. So that's been true for refugee and immigrant groups in particular, because there's so many people looking for those seeds and having a hard time finding them. So I don't have any numbers in front of me, but you know, I think for the you know, one of the more popular crops, callaloo, I think in the last year, from literally a pint of seed, it's been almost $1,000 that the farmer has gotten. And so that's been really significant for them. For some people who are growing very common vegetables, which are still fairly popular, it'll obviously be a lot less than that. So it depends on how many crops you're growing for seed, how popular they are, etc. So we would just talk that through. So.
I'll let you read the questions if you want. That might be easier that are coming into the chat box.
Sure. Okay. I see. Interested in how you acquire the more traditional seeds initially. I got a lot of my seeds were given to me by my mentor over the years. Every winter, this time and earlier, we would go through the entire collection of 4,000 seeds and decide what we had to grow that year based on how old the seed was. And when it was old and we had newer seed, he would just give me the old packets. And I would go and try to grow them. I had 5 gardens around Philadelphia at that point that I was tending to so that I could isolate and grow these varieties. So a lot of them came from Roughwood Seed Collection, but also I've been to so many seed swaps. I run seed swaps every winter here through the Philadelphia Seed Exchange at the public library. I'm constantly meeting farmers. And now that people see me as like the seeds guy, people are always bringing me seeds from everywhere. And so that's where a lot of them come from. And so that's the answer there. How do you suggest to go and learn the stories of the seeds you have acquired or already have? The best way is to ask the person giving them to you. You know, and it doesn't always, you know, most times people don't know much of the story, but sometimes they do. Another way is to just do a lot of internet research. Also learning the names of the seeds in other languages kind of yields quite a bit of information. Learning the Latin names so that you can find the descriptions in other languages yields a lot of information. That said, I also kind of obsessively buy books about food and farming, and I have lots of reference books from, you know, I have 2 books just about peppers where they have hundreds of types of peppers. I have an heirloom tomatoes book. I have curious vegetables book. I have a lot of books. I have my mentor wrote several books about heirloom vegetables, and because many of my seeds come from his collection, a lot of the stories are in his books. So it's really looking to all sources, but also talking to the people who still hold those seeds and care for them is a huge piece of it. Interviewing people to whom Molahia or Callaloo or Wakate or Ahiamarillo are important is the best way to learn how they're used in real time and in real life. So that's an important way to find the history and the use of them. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to find the next question. Okay, how do you choose which seeds to save and which to decline? Yeah, that's a good question because I have a huge seed collection and I can't grow them all. And so it's really a lot of things. One is it connected to my story? Then it's almost an automatic yes, unless it doesn't look interesting or delicious. Another one is it a story that's powerful? I'll grow a seed if it feels like it will tell an important story. Is it something, I mean, really the root of all this, before I even was a conscious person trying to work towards social justice, I was a plant nerd, right? So since I was a kid, I've had a garden, and I've loved plants the whole time. And so a lot of times I'll find seeds that I'm just fascinated by, and I've never seen anything like it. And I want to know how it grows, and I want to know how it tastes, and I want to see if I can grow it in this climate. And so curiosity is often the first thing, but of course also the story and future possibilities of rematriation, of regenerating the seed and then being able to share. So those are some of the ways. And a lot of times in my collection, I'll have people approach me and say, I want to grow for you. And I'll see if any of the seeds that I already have are interesting to them, whether it's because of their connection to it or for some other reason. How do you suggest, oh, I read that one already. I'm curious where the seeds folks are saving are starting from. Many of the Karen incubator farmers from Burma begin by saving seeds from Baker Creek or elsewhere, and then save the seeds from year to year. Are these still considered proprietary in any way to the original seed company? Not with Baker Creek. Most seed companies ideally want seeds to be proliferated and shared and grown by as many people as possible. I've heard that from several seed companies, and a lot of these seed companies, they got their seeds from the same thing, from getting from other seed companies or from traveling the world and gathering them. Seeds are not proprietary. Seeds are part of the collective commons. Seeds are our collective inheritance. And so unless it was bred by a university program and has patents on it, it's not going to be considered proprietary. There's actually a lot of plant breeders now who are pledging their seeds open source seed initiative, meaning that they're allowing anybody to grow them and breed with them and use them as long as they are not made proprietary. So that's a cool new movement. But to answer your first question, you know, honestly, several of the refugee groups that I work with are smuggling seeds. People are doing it left and right. And that's where a lot of the seeds are coming from. What's cool about that is that now the seeds are here. What's hard about that, not even looking at legal stuff, is they're adapted to a whole different climate and a whole different region. And so part of the work is adapting them here to this climate, and also trying to find seeds that have already been adapted here. Sometimes part of the adaptation process, like with roselle, which is a popular crop in Burma and beyond, the little hibiscus flowers, they won't go to seed in this climate. And so I've heard someone bred some northern adapted roselle that can go to seed, but then it loses all the qualities that people wanted to begin with as you're selecting for a new thing, like northern adaptivity. However, there are lots of success stories like that where people are able to adapt seeds, like gandules, you know, or pigeon peas, very popular in the Caribbean and other parts of the world. It's very hard to get them to go to flower and go to fruit and seed here. But there have been people who've successfully been able to do that. And this year, some of our growers will be producing seed for that. And we're very excited to be able to share that with northern growers who love gandules or pigeon peas. So I hope that answers the question.
I have a question here from someone in the office. What are some of the ancestral seed species that are from Northern European Jewish heritage?
Not like separate from Eastern European?
Northern and say it again.
Northern and Eastern,
yeah. Northern and Eastern separate from what you said, yes.
That's a good question. That's why I'm not doing it yet. I also only recently learned of my Eastern European Jewish heritage. But because of that, I've been starting to look into it and talking to people from Jewish Farm School, talking to various groups that are focused on Jewish farmers around the country. And people don't have ready answers. Sometimes it's types of grain. Sometimes it's, you know, people will point to horseradish. People will point to, what else? You know, apples, you know, things that are part of like ritual meals.
and I can't really speak with any expertise around Jewish culture, but you know, it seems to be that there's been a long-term disconnection from the land and from farming, which is true for other groups as well, in a way that makes it difficult to identify what those crops would be. And so it's been a very challenging question to answer. You know, in some ways I've looked at like ancient texts to try to get a sense of that. But as you look at the ancient texts, you're getting into the Middle East. And so it separates you from the European history. And so it's been a complicated question. And then when you're looking at like the parts of, in my case, Eastern Europe, where my Jewish ancestors came from, it's hard to just look in general and not look at specifically at Jewish communities because of the isolation and because of the insularness of those communities. So it's a challenging question, and I don't have the answer. I would love to. I have plans with people locally to dig into this more, like Nati from Jewish Farm School, but I don't have a good answer at this moment. If people have an answer, I would love to hear it. How do you, okay. Have you experienced or found people raising rare varieties of animals associated with traditional diets? Not that jumps to the top of my head. I'm sure I've heard of examples of this, but because of most of my work has been in urban places and very small scale rural farms, I haven't got ventured into that realm yet, but I'm certainly very interested in that. Again, sorry not to have a better answer for that. Did I miss anything? I've been scrolling through here and I'm not sure if I missed anything. Oh, I see one. How did you initially get into seed saving as your background in farming or gardening? Like I said, I've been growing food since I was a teenager in my backyard. It was really my own garden, supported by my mom's instructions and my dad's kind of manual help occasionally with rototilling. But my first venture into farming was dropping out of school at 19 and farming in Virginia in the mountains, and then moving to San Francisco and finding community gardening. And I ended up going back to school for urban planning, but focusing all my research on food and farming within this urban planning context and food justice, environmental justice. This all stems from my initial interest in environmental justice and how, you know, environmental issues disproportionately impact communities of color and poor people. So this kind of stems out of my passion for plants and my focus on urban planning and environmental justice. My informal training, like I said earlier, was from my mentor, William Moyes Weaver, at his seed collection. But in terms of farming, I've worked 2 seasons at Tobacco Road Farm in northeastern Connecticut, where I really learned no-till practices, small-scale rural farming practices. And so those are kind of the major influences on my work in terms of farming.
How do you suggest people get started in seed saving? Like, what are the first things, you know, easy things to save from, materials people need, kind of your basics to get going?
You don't need anything at all to start. I mean, you can just, if you know, for any of us, often will accidentally let plants go to seed, and that's a great place to start. Even walking through the woods, walking through a park, walking anywhere you can. I think the first part is identifying a seed. What is a seed? Where is the seed in the plant? When is the seed ripe? That's the first part, is getting to really know plants from seed to seed. We know plants, you know, we know lettuce as a nice little lettuce head or a leaf. Even tomatoes, which when we eat them have totally ripe seeds, we don't often think about the living seeds in that fruit. And so being able to start identifying where is the seed and when is it ripe is really the first step. And you don't really need hardly any materials to start saving those seeds. So I think people should just get going with it. Just start. There's so many considerations. Like you could actually go on a shopping spree and get tons of supplies and scale up and get ready for seed saving this year, and also totally change your garden plan so that you're making sure that your two varieties of tomatoes are not making a hybrid. Like there are considerations like that. Considerations around how many plants of one thing should I grow so that there's really strong genetic diversity in that crop. Those are some thoughts as well. So if you want to go to that level, if you want to really dive in, I would suggest maybe getting Seed to Seed by Susanna Ashworth, which was a really great introductory book for me. Seed to Seed. It goes through that. One of the nice things about her book is that it has so many types of plants in it, spanning kind of the world. Obviously not everything, but it's really pretty comprehensive. At the farm scale, John Navazio wrote a great book called The Organic Seed Grower, I think, or maybe The Organic Seed Farmer. And so that's great in terms of scaling up to seed production, though it really focuses very limited on kind of dominant cultural crops like tomatoes, lettuce, certain types of beans. It doesn't get into a lot of the crops that my growers are focused on, like okra or callaloo, or it really stays pretty narrow. But it's really helpful to think about scaling up and looking at that book. There's great resources online like Seed Matters from the Cliff Bar Foundation. They have an excellent handout that has a chart with a lot of common crops, again, not all, and there's Latin name, how many plants you might want to grow to have strong genetics, how far you might want to keep it from other varieties of that same species, how long the seed lasts in storage, other considerations. So that's a great resource, and maybe I can find a way to send it to Groundswell to send out to the whole group that registered. So those are some nice resources. The tools that I find most handy are a big bucket, like a big bucket, and a stick. And for the dry seeded crops like lettuce or cabbage or that whole family, the cabbage family, and most asters like lettuce, and what else? A lot of the herbs like mint family things, where the seeds will form after the flower dries out, and they'll dry out, and you can see all the seeds in the seed head, or maybe they're in pods on the seed head. And I will stick the dried seed head in the bucket after it's dried down even further and whack it with the stick. And that's how the seeds come out. And you could see in the previous slide when we were winnowing with the baskets in the air, you can do that carefully, or use your breath with a bowl and start to separate the chaff from the seed that way. So those are some, another really easy one is tomatoes. People get intimidated by the fermentation process, but it's very simple. Just squeezing out tomatoes into a jar, putting a little water so it doesn't dry out, covering it so the flies don't get in, and letting it ferment for 3 to 5 days. You'll separate the gel from the seed and then decant it, add water and decant it so that only the seed remains, pouring off all the floating gel and mold. You'll have really good quality tomato seed with some disease control from the fermentation that you can plant the next year. Peppers are even easier when you just scrape them out onto a paper towel, let them dry away from the sun, ready to plant, as long as the pepper was truly ripe. Can't do that with a green pepper or a purple pepper. So knowing, again, back to the first thing I said, when are the seeds ripe? When are they truly mature? And you're not taking them from the plant before they've gotten everything they need from the plant. That's really one of the first steps, is being able to identify a ripe seed and then learn how to extract it. Later, you can get into how to isolate to prevent unwanted cross-pollination. If you're jumping right into producing seeds, you'll want to know all of that right away. But as a backyard seed saver, community garden seed saver, you don't have to think too much about that. It's very rare that you'll find cross-pollination that'll make a crop inedible. So those are some quick answers. I see another one here. Do you know of any rematriation of Caribbean Taino seeds and Taino, and like to grow some of my ancestral foods? Looking forward to the gandules. Yes. Yes. Well, I don't want to speak of it too early, but one of my first farm school students from like maybe 9 years ago contacted me. He's Puerto Rican and wants to grow a bunch of his crops, and he'll be one of the gandules producers this year. And he'll also be helping with the ajis, hoping for culantro or cacao. And already ají dulce is in our catalog. But in terms of more organized rematriation work, I'm not sure. There's a lot of work happening to recover from the hurricane, where farmers are sharing seeds with each other. And I've been able to send some seeds down. But I could definitely connect, if people have questions like this, you can email me and I can try to connect you to other growers that I know who are focused on those particular crops from your background, whatever that might be. What does no-till growing entail? In my case, there's a lot of ways to do it, and I just found that there's 2 podcast series just on no-till growing that I've been listening to. But how I learned it from Tobacco Road, really the idea is that the soil is alive, microorganisms. When you till it, you're killing the macroorganisms, you're disrupting the microorganisms, you're disrupting all of the airflow that has happened naturally through root growth and dieback, through worms moving through. You're disrupting the movement of water. You're disrupting the fungal networks. You're just cutting and dicing the fungal networks. Fungal networks feed the roots. Fungal networks communicate between plants. There's so much going on down there that when we go through there with a tractor or a tiller, we're just like wiping it clean. And so my practice is to either weed whack the crop residue or hoe it just at the surface, like barely touching the roots, and then covering it with plastic, clear plastic. When it's 70 degrees and sunny or hotter, it only takes a day to kind of bake down the surface level crop residue and weed residue. And then I cover that with a layer of compost and plant directly into it. So that's my practice. There's lots of practices out there, but it's just a quick answer to that question. How is your business doing? Are there things you need support to be successful? That's nice. It's going better than I expected. I've never run a business before, and this is only the 2nd year of selling seeds since we started. And I've been really grateful for all of the orders coming through. I've had friends who saw what I was doing early on just hand me checks saying, we like what you're doing. We know you don't have support. Here you go. And that's really how I've been able to make it this far, is people deciding to shop with us, but also people handing me checks with no strings attached. And so both of those things are always welcome. I didn't seek out those checks or that support, but I've been really pleased that what I'm doing speaks to people who are wanting to grow seeds. And I think it helps that the growers that I'm working with are also kind of putting the word out about what we're doing. That said, it's not at this point anywhere near financially sustainable. I'm not anywhere near making a living wage, and I'm mostly reliant on underpaid apprentices. And so my long-term vision is that this will support all of us, and that we will be able to, that I'll be able to hire more help. But it's only the beginning of the 2nd year of seed sales. So it's a lot to expect to be happening right now, but I am very encouraged by the direction that it's going. In terms of other support, just getting the word out is always great. Letting people know what we're doing, letting people know why you think it's important. I get really nice messages from customers and farmers saying, wow, I can't believe you have this plant. It's so important to me. Thank you for what you're doing. Or, wow, I love, the way you're supporting these farmers. So letting people know about that is always very, very helpful. I welcome people to come and spend the day with us and work side by side with us. There's occasionally workshops here at the farm and volunteer days, but a lot of times it's ad hoc. As people are available, they reach out and come and get to know us and get to know our crops here and help us. So
those are some ways. But in general, I'm definitely encouraged by the response to this work. Feels good.
Thank you so much. This has been really great to hear more about your story and the stories of the growers that contribute to Truelove. And I apologize for the technical difficulty on the discussion group. We're continuously, when Zoom works, it's amazing. And when it doesn't, obviously it's not what we're planning for. So we're continuing to try to learn how to use it here. But thanks so much, and we'll once again be sending a short feedback form about this session to all participants, and strongly encourage you to fill it out. It won't take long. This video has been recorded and will be posted to the Groundswell blog in about a week or so. We do just some minor editing just before it's posted. So stay tuned for that, and share it around with others who couldn't participate today. Thanks so much, Owen.
Thank you all so much. It was great talking to you. Please be in touch if you're interested.
Bye all. Thank you.
Bye-bye.